For those of you who wish to purchase the first two complete books of my biography, please check out the description where you will find the links to my books published on Amazon, and you can write any questions or comments below this video.
As mentioned earlier, my mother was an indefatigable spirit, refusing to let anything or anyone deter her from her noble objective, creating a better life for our family. Even with her limited command of the new language, she tirelessly sought connections and opportunities to enhance our living conditions. Her relentless efforts eventually bore fruit, leading us to a new home in the nearby town of Bel Air, located in the state of Ohio, just across the Ohio River. As we settled into our new life in Bel Air, my father commuted daily to Wheeling for work, while I pursued my studies in Benwood. However, our time in Bel Air was fleeting. Within a couple of months, we found ourselves on the move again. This time, we relocated to Youngstown, Ohio, where my father had received an offer for a job as a construction worker, accompanied by a more favorable salary than he had previously earned. In Youngstown, we established ourselves for approximately 6 months, but the promise of greater opportunities beckoned once more. Eventually, we made the decision to journey onward to Chicago, Illinois, where the possibilities for employment were extensive and enticing. We arrived in Chicago during the crisp embrace of early spring in 1968. My father quickly secured a position with a construction subcontractor of Czech origin. The city was home to a vibrant community of immigrants from Czechoslovakia, many of whom inhabited a distinct ethnic neighborhood replete with shops and restaurants that catered to their cultural traditions. The warm familiarity of their language, Czech and Slovak, echoed through the streets, making us feel more at ease and gradually easing the weight of my homesickness. I began attending John Spry School, a public institution just a block from our home. It was here that I started to find my footing in this new world, surrounded by the comforting presence of those who shared similar roots and experiences. At school, I formed a friendship with a boy named John, an exemplary student who consistently earned A's in all subjects, with the lone exception of physical education. Each day after classes, we would walk together to the local public library, where we diligently completed our homework and delved into additional research on a variety of topics. Despite our camaraderie, John held a worldview distinct from my own. He was an atheist. Occasionally, our friendly discussions would turn to the topic of Christianity, but these exchanges often yielded little understanding or resolution. One afternoon, I received an invitation to John's home, where he graciously introduced me to his family. He had 2 younger sisters, and they all resided with their father in a modest apartment within an aging building. As I would later learn, John's father struggled with alcoholism, and the whereabouts of their mother remained a mystery. She had vanished several years prior. Although the father received some government assistance, it was insufficient to sustain the needs of the children. To make ends meet, he took on various odd jobs, while John and his sisters worked part-time at a small local grocery store. This was the first time I bore witness to the stark realities of misery and poverty within the fabric of the American dream. However, my understanding of hardship would soon expand dramatically, revealing an even broader landscape of human suffering and oppression in the United States. On a chilly April morning in 1968, as I prepared for my walk to school, a sudden tumult erupted outside, filled with wild shouts and chaotic screams. Fear gripped us, and my mother quickly reached for the phone, dialing one of our local Czech friends. Their voice was filled with urgency as they implored her to stay indoors, explaining that a violent riot was sweeping through Chicago and other U.S. cities in the wake of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. All public spaces had been shuttered, and the streets of Chicago were heavy with the presence of police and the National Guard. For the next 3 days, the city was enveloped in the cacophony of sirens and gunfire, flames licking the night sky, and the grim sight of lives lost or injured littered across the pavement. It was a time of profound unrest, but gradually the turmoil began to wane. Throughout this period, I continued to practice my faith without interference from my classmates or anyone else. I refused to allow the boundaries of brick-and-mortar churches to confine my spirituality. Instead, I nourished it daily under the loving guidance of my cherished parents. One Sunday, while my parents attended Mass at the local Catholic church, the priest announced that he needed someone from the congregation to read a passage from the Bible, as the scheduled reader was unable to attend. I glanced around, noticing the silence that hung in the air as no one stepped forward. At that moment, a voice within me resonated. God needs you. Will you say yes or no to him? With a flutter of nerves, I raised my hand and the priest gestured for me to approach the altar. He led me to the lectern and pointed out the passages I would be reading. A swell of anxiety churned within me, and I dared not gaze at the congregation, acutely aware of my shyness, an affliction that had once made introducing myself in class feel insurmountable. After the reading, the priest asked to speak with me in the sacristy once Mass concluded. I nodded in agreement and returned to my seat, heart racing. When the service ended, I ventured into the sacristy and the priest introduced himself, asking for my name. He smiled at me and said, "You know, Anthony, you have a lovely voice. We need people like you, and we would be happy to provide you with training to read from the scriptures regularly." I accepted his offer, and over the next 2 weeks I attended a workshop at the parish rectory in preparation for my new role. Each Sunday, I grew increasingly relaxed and confident. I learned to lift my gaze from the book, initially fixing my eyes at the back of the church, above the heads of the congregation, to avoid becoming nervous. Gradually, I began to make eye contact, first with foreheads and eventually with the eyes of those listening. This marked the first steps of what I believed to be a divine journey, one that would ultimately lead me toward my future vocation. On another occasion, the choir director approached me after Mass and requested a moment of my time. "You have a beautiful voice," he said. "I would like to audition you for our choir. You would serve the Lord wonderfully." Overwhelmed by his words, I could only respond affirmatively. During the audition, I discovered that I could sing both bass and tenor. Soon, I was attending 2 Sunday Masses, one to read from the Bible and the other to sing in the choir. Yet God's call for me was not merely a partial commitment, he sought all of me. As Christmas approached, choir rehearsals intensified for the Christmas Mass. I was selected to sing a solo accompanied by instruments for one of the hymns. Until that point, I had felt at ease, performing in the choir loft at the back of the church. However, to my astonishment, the true test came on Christmas Eve. The usual arrangement had shifted. Alongside the beautiful Christmas decorations, we choir members were positioned in front of the altar, facing the congregation. We arrived half an hour early to fine-tune our voices, and I found myself praying for the strength to deliver my solo. As the church filled with people, it grew crowded and I dimmed my eyes slightly while singing to concentrate on the performance, grateful that I successfully completed my solo. The following year, in 1969, I graduated from elementary school with marks ranging from A's to B's. During that time, my parents secured a mortgage for a cottage in our neighborhood. Both were now working as janitors at LaSalle Bank in downtown Chicago, and their night shifts allowed them to purchase a car for me, mainly for driving them to work and for errands. I had recently turned 16 and acquired my driver's license, albeit with a restriction requiring an adult passenger while driving. It was time for me to register for high school, a significant step in my academic journey. My parents chose to enroll me in a Catholic school located on the south side of Chicago, about an hour's bus ride from our home. The institution was well organized, and all students were required to wear uniforms, creating an atmosphere of discipline and order. Each day began with Mass, an integral part of our school routine, after which we proceeded to our various classes. Unfortunately, my tenure at this high school was short-lived, primarily due to a combination of challenging circumstances. The daily commute proved to be quite hectic, and the tuition fees along with related expenses quickly became burdensome for my parents. Moreover, I found myself immersed in religious studies far more than in the other subjects I had originally come to explore. I transferred to a school in my neighborhood where my tuition was covered by the state. It was a public institution, but unlike any I had ever encountered before. Chicago police officers guarded the entrance during school hours, patting down incoming students to ensure they carried no weapons or drugs. The classrooms were poorly maintained, filled with old desks and chairs that were scratched and marred by graffiti from local street gangs. The restrooms were a testament to neglect, their walls covered in vulgarity and the toilets often broken or malfunctioning. The environment would have felt more at home in a horror film than in an educational setting. Attending this school presented me with a host of new challenges. The student body was predominantly composed of African American youth, many of whom were bussed in from impoverished neighborhoods. Each day, my journey to and from school was fraught with harassment, as groups of 3 or 4 boys would surround me demanding money. "Give me your money, white boy," they would insist. If I replied that I had none, they would punch and kick me. Fearful of retaliation, I remained silent, reluctant to snitch on them or their friends. Drug dealing was rampant within the school, and it quickly became clear why the police maintained a presence at the entrances. Yet despite these intimidating circumstances, I remained determined to attend school each day. As I have mentioned before, in reality my mother was the head of the family, a force of nature with a strong spirit ready to fight for her loved ones. She possessed masculine traits that outweighed those of any man, while my father embodied humility and gentleness, leaning more towards the feminine side of life. Together, they formed the most remarkable couple I will remember for the rest of my life. Their differences complemented one another, creating a home filled with laughter, love, and the occasional tension that arises in any close-knit family. Now, I would like to focus more on my mother. She loved to socialize and had a zest for life that was infectious. Evenings spent in the company of friends were her sanctuary, and she loved to dance, an exuberance that my father never shared. He was content to watch from the sidelines, a smile on his face as he appreciated the joy that radiated from her. Despite his reluctance to dance, they often went out on weekends to bars featuring lively music and dancing. Because my father was not keen on dancing, he afforded my mother the freedom to dance with others if they politely asked. There was a kind of understanding between them, a silent pact forged over years of companionship. Yet, as time passed, I began to notice changes that sparked a flicker of suspicion in my mind. My mother, once solely focused on our family's dynamics, started dancing frequently with a guy from Poland named Walado. He had divorced and was attractive in a way that captivated her, igniting a spark that I felt should have remained tucked away in the shadows of our lives. What truly evoked a sense of foreboding in me was not just the dancing, but how my beloved mom began visiting him during times when my father was at work. Those clandestine afternoons felt heavy with the kind of unspoken tension that is both terrifying and compelling. Little by little, the relationship between my mom and Walado seemed to grow, turning what had once been harmless socializing into something deeper and more complex. Then came the day when my mother opened up to me, and yes, she had always been open with me, the one secret keeper in the house. She asked me how I would feel if she married again. The question hung in the air like a cloud before a storm. I cannot describe the oppressive weight of sadness that washed over me when I heard those words. It felt as if the foundations of my world were shaking, threatening to upend everything I had known. "No, Mom," I replied, my voice steady yet filled with emotion. "I love you and I love Dad, and I want us to stay together forever." Those words did not just express a child's desire for stability, they articulated a profound yearning for the unbroken family unit I cherished. The thought of my mother, the head of our family, choosing to forge a new path without my father filled me with a sense of dread. As the days turned into weeks, I watched my mother wrestle with internal conflicts that mirrored my own. The laughter and light that once filled our home began to dim, anxiety sprawling across our conversations like an uninvited guest. My father remained blissfully unaware of the emotional storm brewing just beneath the surface, caught up in his work and the simplicity of our daily routines. That summer, the air was thick with unsaid words, as if the very atmosphere in our home was saturated with tension. My mother's unease only deepened as her feelings for Lotto clashed with her responsibilities and love for the family she had built. I was faced with a choice, to accept a future that felt uncertain and fragile, or to fight for the family that had been my anchor in a chaotic world. In my heart, I held on to the hope that one day we could navigate through this tumultuous chapter together, restoring the warmth of love and stability that had defined my childhood. My mother was the embodiment of resilience, and perhaps in time, she would find a way to reconcile her desires with the love that had always flourished within our family. The road ahead felt daunting, but in the midst of turmoil, I knew our collective story was far from over.
For those of you who wish to purchase the first 2 complete books of my biography, please check out the description where you will find the links to my books published on Amazon, and you can write any questions or comments below this video.